Hello, and welcome to the Million Dollar Speaker Podcast. Hi, I'm Arvee Robinson, and I'm the Master Speaker Trainer, International Speaker, and author of Speak Up, Get Clients, and the host of the Million Dollar Speaker Podcast, where we talk about what makes a person a million dollar speaker. How do we reach a million people? And how do we make $1 million doing it? And I have a very special guest today who is an experienced speaker, an experienced sales professional. And I'm so excited to have him on the show today. And that is Mr. Ben Gay III. Ben Gay III has been called a legend, a living legend in the sales world. After 50 plus years in professional selling, he has been the #1 salesperson in every organization in which he worked. At age 25, he was president of what was then the world's largest direct sales networking marketing company, having been personally trained by fellow sales legends, J. Douglas Edwards, Dr. Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, William Penn Patrick, Zig Ziglar, and many other sales giants. One of the most famous, popular, and powerful sales trainers in the world, Ben now writes, publishes, and produces The Closers. It's a series of books, audio, video, newsletters, teletraining, and live seminars, a series that is considered to be the foundation of professional selling. Ben was the founder and is the current executive director of the National Association of Professional Salespeople. Ben and his lovely wife, Gigi, live near Lake Tahoe in a little northern California town of Placerville, where the California Gold Rush began. So help me welcome Mr. Ben Gay III. Yay! Hi, Ben.
How are you?
I'm great. It's so wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. My pleasure and honor.
All right, great. So Ben, the first question that I want to ask you is, what are the characteristics that make a $1 million speaker?
Well, the characteristics and how you do. There are people like my old friend Zig Ziglar who came out of the womb laughing, giggling, and telling funny stories, and so on. You know, he would have been a speaker if he'd been a plumber.
Right.
He'd be speaking at plumbing conventions. That wasn't my nature. I had to learn, and what Zig taught me was practice. Get up in front of groups and talk. In fact, shortly after we became buddies and started working together, he used to say of me, Ben Gay would work a traffic accident. You know, wherever, to quote from the Bible, wherever 2 or more people are gathered together, right, Ben Gay will appear and start speaking. So Zig said, exposure, you've got to do it early and often and get comfortable doing it, etc. Whether it's Toastmasters or being the MC at your Rotary Club or whatever, get started, get up in front of them. Because if we're looking for a certain personality type, we would rule out over half of all the great speakers I've ever heard. Because what speaking really comes down to, if the delivery is entertaining enough so they don't fall asleep, is content. You got to have something to share with them. And that would be another thing I would add to the list of things to do, is meet interesting people. You've got to have something to talk. One of the best speakers I've ever heard is our adopted son, Lamont Bowen.
Oh, nice.
He came to my public speaking class at the federal penitentiary at Lompoc and asked if he could join. Well, he was 19 years old, a drug dealer, doing, I think it was 5 years or something for drugs. High school dropout. That's assuming he ever dropped in. I never asked him, so I'm not sure, but I assume he spent some time in high school before he got thrown out. And his plan was to get up get out, serve out his term, stick up somebody, get $400 or $500, and get back in the drug business. That was it. And I was told that by a guy who said, I'm gonna try and get him into your class.
Mhm.
So that was our starting point. Uh, he came up to me one night as I had arrived and was about to go in. He said, Mr. Gay, can I come in? I said, certainly. He said, now you're not ever going to make me speak. And I said, no, I would never do that. So we walked in the side door. We're now in front of, I don't know, 150, 200 inmates, but we're at the front of the room, in front of the front row. And I said, gentlemen, we have a guest speaker tonight, first time in the class and so on. And I had my hand on his shoulder. I could feel him tighten up. And I said, I promised him I wouldn't have him speak tonight, but I just really think he would be good, and it would be good for him, ladies and gentlemen, Lamont Bowens. And he taught Arvee, if I'm guessing, 5 minutes. For those 5 minutes, he was as good as Martin Luther King Jr. I
Wow.
mean, the voice was there, the confidence was there, everything. But after 5 minutes, he stopped because that's all he had to say. He had no content, so you've got to build a reservoir of interesting people. I aggressively seek them. You've have some idea of the people that I've known and worked with.
Yes.
None of those were accidental. I sought them out. I learned from them. I took notes. Uh, Zig and I joined the same business on the same day in Atlanta years ago. And he used to do biscuits, fleas, and pump handles. That was his famous speech. Well, the biscuits didn't need any props, and the fleas didn't. He told the story. But the pump handle, he insisted on dragging this old, like you'd see at a farm,
Right.
pump
Old
around.
fashioned pump. Yeah.
Yeah. And he had a real one. It wasn't yet aluminum. Later, I talked to him about getting an aluminum one, but it was a real steel one, I guess, heavy. And I said to him, he was complaining about dragging it in, and he didn't like to be seen dragging things when he was going to be the speaker. And so I said, well, I'll carry him for you. He was 18 years older. Zig was in the Navy the day I was born.
Oh, dear.
Little spread in age. I said, I don't have any image to protect. I'll carry the pump handle in exchange for dinner whenever we're doing a seminar or you're doing a seminar, front row, the right to take notes, and then after the talk, ask questions. He said, deal. So I probably carried, I'm guessing, I probably carried that pump into 50 or 60 rooms before I was ready to stand up. And then I started introducing him.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
then the introduction got longer and longer and longer till finally we agreed that I should be doing my own stuff. But and I'd stolen most of his by then anyway, so there wasn't much left for him to do.
Wow.
But that was experience, and get around people, study the greats who are already doing it. And in
Right.
my case, it was Zig, and then rather quickly it was J. Douglas Edwards and Og Mandino and Earl Nightingale and all the people I was fortunate enough to hang out with. And in every way, if you saw me in a room, in fact, the first time you and I met was in a meeting room. If I wasn't speaking, I was seated somewhere with a legal pad in front of me. I
Right.
take notes.
Right.
I'm still learning. So
Right.
take action, get rolling, print up your cards that say you're a speaker, professional speaker or something. So when you tell somebody you're a speaker, even if maybe technically that's a
Not
bit of
yet.
a stretch, yeah, hand
Right.
them the card. I'm a speak and know your rate that you're going to ask in the beginning.
Right.
Well,
Right.
what would it take for you to come speak to my group? $500.
You're
All right,
valued.
whatever it is, have your cards and a one sheet rather quickly after that, and have a rate set in your mind and decide you are a professional speaker. I am a professional speaker. I never went to Dale Carnegie public speaking class. I was just around people and watched them.
Right. I just want to recap because you said so many brilliant things. So some of the attributes that I caught is again, standing up consistently and speaking, giving great content, your best content. And I always share with people your latest content, not something old, that's real old, but the latest and greatest content. And then study the greats. I love that. That's $1 million idea right there. Study the greats, take copious notes, be a student, carry business cards, say you're a speaker, know what your rate is, have a speaker one sheet, and make that decision that you're a speaker, whether or not you feel like you're a speaker yet. So those are all great ideas. And one thing I want to ask you, you've shared the stage with so many powerful speakers, icons, great speakers. Tell us, who is one of the most exciting, memorable speakers that you have shared the stage with?
Well, we've already talked about several. We're mentioning their names. Zig, of course, Zig would have made a good lounge act, a comedian or whatever. He's known as a salesman, but selling really wasn't his strong suit. Storytelling was. So Zig was good. If Zig was on, I figured out a way to get in the back of the room and watch, even towards the end of his career. Right. Content-wise, it was probably somebody most people nowadays haven't heard of, but it was William Penn Patrick, Bill Patrick. Right. He was the owner of Holiday Magic Cosmetics and all of our subsidiary companies. And he was the one that sort of took me under his wing. He taught me without knowing it, he taught me the importance of effective communications. I got up in the morning, was out in San Rafael, California from Atlanta, and we were learning the scripts and so on, the top people in the company, which didn't mean much at the time, but we were the top people, Zig and several other people, 15 of us, I think. So we got up and we did our little thing, and it was recorded on a Sony Betamax, reel to reel in a wooden cabinet. And when you went to watch it, you flipped up a screen and watched in black and white what it had recorded, which I thought was amazing. And so I did my little thing just because I had to, didn't think much about it. Then we went back to these rooms to start practicing our presentations, and I had forgotten my notebook. So I came back up, and I won't bore you with the layout, but the way I came into the room, Bill Patrick and the then president of the company, Fred Pape, were looking at that screen on that Sony Betamax with their back to me. They didn't know I had walked in, and I heard my voice. They were watching my presentation of that morning, and Bill Patrick, Fred Pape said, "He's good." And Bill Patrick said, "I will pay more for the ability to effectively communicate than any other skill." Well, I did the moonwalk back out of the office. I got my training manual later. I decided not to ruin this magic moment. But I just heard from the chairman of the board of the company, the 100% owner for almost, and that he would pay more for the ability to effectively communicate than any other skill. And I was already up speaking in 500 people, 1,000 people, so on. But that was the moment I said, I'm going to get good at this. This could pay really well. And everything of big money stemmed from that moment. And rather quickly, I was making the big money. And Zig and I were asking $300 to talk.
A speech?
Back then. Yeah, for a speech. Cavett Robert would travel to where you were for free if you guarantee him a crowd of 100 people and let him sell his records. And for those young people listening, I did say records.
Records.
Before cassette tapes. Right. So it wasn't yet big. Earl Nightingale kept raising his. I remember when he got to $1,500, and I said, "Earl, why are you raising your rate?" He said, "I'm trying to find a rate that they won't pay." He hated public speaking.
Is that right?
He was a studio guy. He liked to sit in the booth and be Earl Nightingale, the voice of the big gun out of Chicago, WGN. Right. That's when he was in heaven. When he worked at our seminars, I would always arrange to have a double bourbon backstage to give to him right before he went on to settle his nerves. He hated it.
Oh my God.
My point is, we come from that era, and then fast forward to you, me, and the way it's evolved. That sounds funny. Adjusted for inflation, it's really not as funny as it sounds. But that if you had said to somebody back then, I'm going to make $200,000 in an hour between fees and product sales, whatever, they would have thought you were absolutely nuts.
Nuts. Yeah. I love it. So what was the most, if you don't mind me asking, what was the most you've ever got paid for a speech? Without sales, but just for the speech itself.
Well, my rate is $9,500 now. I ought to raise it. It's been that for 25 years, plus expenses, et cetera. So it's really where I do combos that, to answer your question. I did a series of seminars, 20 seminars in 20 days, 9,500 each.
Whoa.
So the answer to your question is 9,500, but multiples change that.
Right.
And then let me give you a really cute one. In Norway, a dear friend of mine brought me over. He used to work for me in the States, but brought me over, and he said, we want you to do, I think either 10 or 11, 10 talks in 11 days. And he said, what's your rate? And I said, what's your rate? I said, 9,500. He said, all right. And I want books to sell them. He wanted to sell the book. So at whatever discount rate he got for that, he bought, I think it was 40,000 copies of the closers, part 1, part 2, whatever. So that added on to the almost 100,000 in speaking fees. And then, frankly, we did a great job. So the last night, they had a board of directors / farewell to Ben Gay dinner, at which they announced that they were going to give me, for my continuing help with their company, 4% of the company. Well, the night they gave it to me, 4% of the company on the European Stock Exchange was $14 million.
Wow.
So the answer to your question is 14 million plus over 100,000 plus $40,000-$50,000 in book sales. That was probably my single biggest hit. But I've talked to groups of 15, 20,000. You tell them how to reach you and sign books at the back of the. They still. I did a talk this morning, and I was told just before you and I got on that 3 book orders have come in, and I hadn't been off the phone, off the camera, 20 minutes.
Wow.
So as Bill Patrick said, the ability to effectively communicate is very, very valuable.
Amen. Well, you truly are $1 million speaker, and you could say that because you've made millions doing it.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your book for a minute, because I know that is like the top book. So do you have a copy with you?
Do I have a copy with you?
Yes.
Are you crazy?
Oh, there we go. The closers.
We got a whole bunch of them, but the
beautiful.
Closers Part 1, that's the best-selling book on selling closing ever written. We sold
best-selling book. Good.
10.5 million copies when we quit counting 25 years ago. And then the Closers Part 2 is frankly a better book. It's what sophisticated people really do with the information in the first book. And if we have time, I'll tell your folks where to go and get it, because there's a place that has special pricing, lower than I sell it, and free shipping.
Absolutely. At the end of this podcast, yes, I want you to share that, because I want to get my copy. I want to get my copy. Now, one of the greatest things I love about you is your ability to storytell and for storytelling. And I know the great of the greats of the great speakers learn how to master storytelling. And that's how you and I met. We met many years ago, probably, I don't know, a good 15 years ago. And I was sitting in an audience, and you spoke at an event where for my mentor, Eric Lofholm, and he brought you in because you're one of his mentors, and he has a great story about the book and everything like that too. But you came in, and like your whole speech, I remember, was story after story after story. And at one point, you were telling a story about Charles Manson. And I stopped in the audience and I went, wait, I don't interrupt speakers, but I just had to, right? right? And I went, wait. And you said, yes, what? And I said, well, what was it like to be in the same room with Charles Manson? I was so fascinated. And then you shared another powerful story. So would you please share that story with our audience today?
Sure. Well, earlier we were talking about how to be $1 million speaker. One of the ways is build content, have experiences, go looking for experiences. Well, I went looking at San Quentin, got the name of the warden, Red Nelson, called on him to sell him a course called People Builders that I had made up in my mind, but it was what I was doing all the time anyway, out in the real world. And revolved a lot around public speaking, which is a great confidence builder. And I gave him the sales presentation. It was magnificent, I thought. And back then, I think I was going to charge him $1,000 a night, come in on a Friday night, stay the Saturday morning, do a 12-hour sort of encounter type seminar. And he said, and he knew a little bit about me. He said, I love it. I'm going to push it through. And that'll be great. No argument about the price or anything. And I said, what does push it through mean in bureaucraties? And he said, well, I've got a little power as a warden. He said, I think I can get this done in a couple of years. I said, what?
Couple years?
Yeah. It's the reason I don't plant a garden. I plant seeds and then I start yelling, come on, let's go. Let's go. I watered you. What do you want? So after a little back and forth, and I discovered, and he had his secretary bring a huge stack of papers in. He said, you got to fill all these out. Well, Arvee, as you know, good salespeople are not good form filler outers.
Right.
So between the forms and 2 years, I thought, God, I've wasted my day. And then I said to him, what if we did it for free? And he said, we could start tonight or this afternoon.
Ooh.
And he looked at me for an answer. I said, okay, because it was fascinating enough to get in the prison. I wanted to see what it was like. So he picked up the microphone, made an announcement, and less than an hour later, I was standing in front of my first 200 classmates, victims, as they sometimes call themselves, and teaching people builders, which I then did once a week for 5 years. I'm guessing, a couple of years into that, the correctional officer, Lieutenant Terry Wooster, who'd been assigned to me by the warden to clear roadblocks. I had free run of the prison, but not everybody knew that. So Lieutenant Wooster was assigned when I was there to let nothing get in my way. And Terry came up to me and he said, Ben, I got an inmate who wants to meet you. And I said, really? Well, tell him to come to the class. He said, this one can't come to the class. So I was thinking death row, which I never went into. It's the only place in prison I never went. I didn't feel comfortable going in, staring into the cages of people. And back then they were actually executing people. Now death row doesn't mean anything other than a cell block you're in. But he said, no, this one can't come. But he said, I guarantee he's looking at us right now. And he pointed at a building called the Adjustment Center, where they put people who didn't qualify for death row or had been taken off of death row, but still didn't play well with others. So they were pretty much locked down all the time. He said, he's right through that window, and I suspect he's looking at us now because that's how come he knew who you were. He saw you come in every Friday night and leave every Saturday morning. I said, really? What's his name? He said, Charlie Manson. And I said, it was a little closer to the Charlie Manson days. Now it's a sort of a historical footnote. We just lost him. He died, I don't know, a year ago at age 80, just as he was about to get married again. I was thinking, Charlie's finally settling down. I'm so proud of him.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah. So we set up a meeting, and I said, where are we going to meet? He said, you're going to meet the only place he can go, in his cell. So I went into the Adjustment Center, top tier, last cell on the end, and he was there waiting for me. He looked like a little spider monkey, hands on the bars, looking out like this. And I said, hi, my name is Ben Gay. Shook his hand. The guard unlocked the gate and the cell door, and I went in. And we spent about 3 hours together. And then he asked me to come back. So we did another 3 hours. Then he asked me to come back. We did another 3 hours. So I spent about 9 hours locked up with him.
Wow.
One of the fascinating things that stands out in my mind, I walk in, he's got a 2 bunk cell. The top bunk is basically a bookshelf, I mean, or a shelf where he kept clothing, what little belongings he had. And then he slept on the lower bunk. On the top bunk, there was one book lying there. And so I'm a book guy. I want to know what people are up to. And I'm looking around the cell. It was the only book there. So I pick it up. It was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, one of the great motivational books of our time, and how to work with people and so on. And I said, Charlie, what an interesting book selection. He said, it's my Bible. I could not have built the Manson family without it.
Whoa.
Now you can go, whoa, that must be an evil book. It's not an
No,
evil
it's
book.
not.
It's a great book, but like a gun, you can use it for good or evil, positive or negative. So he
Right.
took, I'm glad Dale didn't live to know that, but Charlie Manson built the Manson family around how to win friends and influence people.
Amazing story.
So people say, well, you scared. He wasn't physically imposing. He was a little guy. He reminded me of the first time I met Sammy Davis Jr. They were about the same height,
Really?
small, wiry. And so he wasn't a physical threat, but I hadn't been with him long before I thought to myself, oh, I get it. His eyes, when he looked in your eyes, it looked like he was looking in your eyes and out the back of your head. And
Whoa.
he never broke contact. Once he locked on you, uh, I think you could probably hide under the bunk. He'd still be looking at you right in your eyes. And I remember thinking, I'm really glad that I've met him now, rather successful, settled in, have already taught classes all over the world. Charlie Manson's not the biggest thing that ever happened to me, versus his normal victim, a 19-year-old in Haight-Ashbury wandering around trying to find themselves.
Right,
And
right.
then you meet, I was telling my Jimmy Rucker, my business partner, one time, I said, Jimmy, be glad, because we got into a little stuff, mainly lightweight beer and chasing girls, but nevertheless, I said, be glad that drugs weren't around when we were growing up, because we probably would have tried them, and be glad we didn't bump into Charlie Manson,
Right.
or else we might have been in Sharon Tate's house. He was extremely persuasive. And if you've seen the Geraldo, whatever his name is, Rivera interviews with him, he talks about looking death in the eye with armed guards everywhere. I was in his cell by myself. Once they knew I was in, the door was locked. The guards went about their business. He was not physically imposing. But if you watch Geraldo, Charlie, you picture Charlie going booga 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 and acting crazy with a swastika.
Right.
He was crazy, but he wasn't that kind of crazy. He
Got it.
was crazy. I'm gonna lock in on you and get you to do what I want. Crazy.
Right.
First time I'm with him, probably 10 minutes into the visit, we hear keys coming down the walkway, down the guard, whatever you call that, outside the tier. And if a guard doesn't want you to know he's coming, he holds his keys so they don't rattle. This one was letting them rattle. He might have even been shaking them because there was no doubt a guard was coming. And Charlie said to me, he was sitting on his bunk, I was on a chair. He patted me on the leg and he said, excuse me 1 second. And he ran over to the cell door. And when the guy came by, he went, booga, 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 booga. And the guy said, hey, Charlie, how are you? And kept going.
Oh my,
Charlie comes over and sits back down to me and next to me and he says, they love that. He said, I do it whenever I can. They love it.
that's so funny.
That
Well,
was part of his act.
that's a great story and a great memory. And but let's talk. You've got so many stories. Let's talk about the Apollo. Let's talk
Ah,
about that story.
Apollo astronauts, Apollo
Yes.
15, 16, and 17. I was head of the cosmetic company. We had a lady named Jeannie Harrington, who was a holiday girl. That's like an Avon lady. And her husband was the launch test supervisor of the manned space program at Cape Canaveral, Kennedy, whatever it was at the time. It's been back and forth. And a great guy and a brainiac. she, being Jeannie, the sweet little Southern belle, called me one day and said, "Would you like to come down and see a launch?" And I said, "Well, sure." And she said,
Yeah.
"Well, Apollo 14's taken off. You stay here at the house. I'll get Jimmy to put you in the VIP stands, and you'll probably meet some interesting people." Well, I go down. All I wanted to see was 14 take off. That was Alan Shepard's flight. And we get down, and they're having a backyard barbecue in my honor, to which they have invited all of the active astronauts at NASA who were in town at the time and not sitting out on the tower getting ready to go. And so I met all of the launch and flight crews of 14 and 15, 16, 17.
Wow.
And somewhere during the evening, I'm sitting, I don't have an autograph book, but if I'd had one, I would have been passing it around trying to get all these famous people's signatures. Well, they came to see me. Jeannie had given me such a build up, and Jim to some degree. And so I'm sitting in a chair in the living room, and I have 9 astronauts sitting on the floor in a semicircle around me. They wanted to know what to do with their lives when it was over. Being an astronaut has an expiration date. It's like a piece of fruit on the shelf.
Oh,
It ain't
dear.
gonna last forever. And the days of being a test flight test pilot, are pretty much over. That's how they got in the astronaut corps. So they're looking about what's next. What do we do when
Right.
this is over? So I started counseling them based on that. And then Jim Irwin, the commander of Apollo 15, said, "Ben, you are our attitude coach." And from that moment on, uh, I didn't get paid. It's like San Quentin, some of my most interesting experiences, I didn't get paid, but I worked with them and their future goals, and I gave them some ideas about how to get more tax. NASA is always short on money, and how to, I said to the administrators, Dr. Davis and Miles Ross, they were head of NASA at the time. When I met with them, I said, "You're always whining about money. You got 100 astronauts on flight status. Most of them are never going to go up, and very few of them are going to go up in the next few minutes. Why don't we put them out on the speaking circuit, telling kids and parents and so on to go tell their Congress people how important NASA is and all the benefits?" And I didn't know what the benefits were, but I said, "Do you have a list of things that have come from NASA that they benefit from?" And it's like Red Nelson at San Quentin. Somebody buzzed somebody, and they came in with a thing that looked like the New York phone book, filled with, if you have a heart attack, God forbid, Arvee, when they will begin treating you in the ambulance outside of the house long before you get to the hospital. They'll hook you up and all that stuff. That all came from NASA. If
Wow.
you have a digital watch, a microwave, or what, all came from NASA. It's just astounding, the
Amazing.
things. Yeah, you have more firepower in the computer you're looking at right now than was in the launch room. Yeah, and that too. Yeah, that was in the launch room when the Mercury program started taking off.
I
And
can't
that
believe.
because we didn't have the big Russian rockets, so they had to miniaturize the United States stuff.
Right.
And when they miniaturized it, the spin-off started coming. I'll bet you before the week is over, there's 100 things you'll use, see, or benefit from that, if we track them, came from NASA.
Wow.
So we
I believe.
started going out telling people. And the other thing I organized was backyard barbecues. The one I went to was accidental. Come meet Ben Gay. Uh, the uh, the others we programmed, because I said Alan Shepard was on 14, and it was technically the worst shot we'd ever put up. It was virtually falling apart, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was rickety by their standards. And he's on the microphone every day. "Come on, guys, let's do this together. Let's tighten all the bolts. That would be a good idea." And so I said, I noticed that when the astronauts were around at the backyard barbecue I went to, they were treated like rock stars, and people were afraid to approach them. Well, they were just regular guys who picked
Hmm.
being a pilot as a lesson. I said, we need to break that down, because I said to Jim Irwin, rather than them having looking at you, the kids and the parents, the people working on the launch crew, as some movie star they're afraid to approach. I want the family gathered around the dinner table with the kids saying to you, the launch crew, I want saying to you, you make sure you put Uncle Jim on a safe rocket.
Yeah.
You make him part of the family. They're not going to put, if Alan Shepard had that relationship with the launch crew, he wouldn't have been on the microphone begging for a good flight, which
Right.
he was.
Yeah.
And then talk about perfection. One last thing, we'll get off astronauts.
Yeah.
When the Saturn V-B rocket took off, which is what launched the Apollo program before the shuttle program, if it took off and it was 99% perfect, that meant it only had 7,000 broken parts.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's the reason they have triple redundancy. This breaks, this kicks in, so on. 7,000 broken parts. That takes teamwork like you and I just don't have to deal with in the regular business world. But they
Right.
didn't have the business world fundamentals.
Mm. Wow. I'd love to continue talking about that, but our time is up today. So, but I am interested in your book. So why don't you tell everyone how they can get your book, The Closer 1 and 2?
Here's how you do it. You go to, this is my website. If you want to go there and register, I'd love to stay in touch with you. But this is where they have deals better than mine. You go to stores.ebay.com/Ronzoni Books, RONZONE books, all one word, of course. And they have special pricing and free shipping. How do they
Beautiful.
do that? Gigi's maiden name is Ronzoni, Gigi being my wife, and she goes into my warehouse and steals books, brings them to me to sign, and then hands them to our shipping department and they mail them out. So I have to actually pay for my books. Therefore, I'd like to
Awesome.
get something for them. She doesn't have that little awkward business problem of paying for things.
Awesome. I love that. And I will put that website in the show notes. So to make sure that everybody gets that. So before we end today, Ben, it's been such an honor to have you. I love all your storytelling. Again, if you want to be $1 million speaker, you've got to be $1 million storyteller. So what would you like to leave our listeners with? The last words of wisdom for today.
Make a decision. I've taught goal setting for years and complicated the sales process so I could make a living explaining how to uncomplicate it. Selling is really pretty simple. 85% of all the problems in selling go away if you pick a quality product or service that is competitively priced and you spend your time communicating with qualified people, qualified to buy it, religiously, geographically, financial, whatever, qualified. If you got the quality product, etc., you make a pretty good living, because if it meets those criteria, they'll buy, a certain percentage will buy in spite of you or through you or whatever's necessary to get the product, because they see what's in it for them. And then you need to develop the other 15%, which is become a person of class, quality, and substance, with the ability to tastefully project that. Effective communications. And then my goal setting technique is I am. It's the first thing Dr. Hill and I agreed on when we started working together. I am. I don't set goals, I claim goals. I was saying I am a millionaire long before I was. I was saying I am president of Holiday Magic Cosmetics before it ever crossed Bill Patrick's mind. In fact, the night he announced it to a big crowd at the Park Sheraton, New York, I reached in my pocket and handed him, I still have one over on my other desk, handed him a fancy Holiday Magic Cosmetics Ben F. Gay III president business card. And I had just finished my I am talk. And he looked at me and he said, "You were already president?" I said, "Well, it took a while for you to come around, but yeah."
Amen. That's powerful. All right, then we have to go, but thank you so much again for being on the show today and all of your brilliance, all of your wisdom. I would love to have you back if you're willing to come back and not charge me $9,500.
You name a time and I'll be there.
All right, excellent. We'll have you back on the show. All right, everyone, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening in, and we'll see you back here next Wednesday. Bye for now.
Bye.